Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this Techstrong learning experience brought to you by AWS and Tigera. My name is Cody, and I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting presentation today. First, I have just a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, perhaps you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend. The on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you look to the right side of your screen, you'll see there are a couple options to engage with our speakers today. First of which is the chat tab. I'd like you to start warming that up for me right now by letting us know from where you are joining us. Right next to that chat tab, you'll see there's a Q&A tab. That's where we want you to send in any questions that you might have throughout our program today. And of course, if you stick around for the end of our program, we will be announcing 4 winners of a $25 Amazon gift card drawing. So please do stick around. The topic of our discussion today is SaaS-based container networking and security on Amazon EKS. And I'm joined by Diraj Sehgal, Director of Technical Solutions at Tigera, and Mohan Atreya, Senior Vice President of Product and Solution at Rafi. So Diraj and Mohan, thank you both so much for joining me today. Diraj, do you want to go ahead and get this conversation kicked off?
Sure. Thank you, Cody, for our introduction. Thank you so much for hosting us for this platform, and let's get started. So we don't have the AWS team here, but I would like to thank AWS team also for helping us host this panel. I will say on the behalf of AWS and Tigera, we basically are bringing this session to discuss about what you call as how to build a SaaS platform, how to secure a SaaS platform on Amazon EKS. And for that, I don't think so there is anyone better to tell their journey other than Rafi here. And for the person who has been in the trenches, who has looked at the broader vision, who has built the story on it, then brought everything together, I have Mohan Atreya with me. He's Senior Vice President, Product and Solutions at Rafi. Mohan, would you like to say some of the words here?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me over. Really look forward to chatting today, and then love to see what kind of questions folks have and see how we can help them out.
Cool. Thank you, Mohan. So let's get started, right? So the theme of the today's is like as people are building SaaS-based platforms, right? Like with the applications now, people are not doing the traditional software, but they're using containers and Kubernetes, right? And they're building this pay-as-you-go SaaS type of models within B2B, B2C, quite a bit. So tell us a little bit about how do you see the industry? How do you see people basically going forward with that type of initiatives? Like what is driving it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is a very large shift in the market that we are seeing. I mean, and predominantly we're seeing like, I mean, if I had to look at our customers and put them in, let's say, 2 simple cohorts that are on Amazon EKS, they're coming onto Kubernetes either because they are modernizing their legacy applications. And this could be like, some part of the journey where they're doing a lift and shift and containerizing parts of it or all of it and getting them onto like a major cloud like Amazon AWS. And of course, the chosen preferred Kubernetes distribution on AWS is almost always EKS, right? That's kind of the cohort 1 that we see. And these are usually larger enterprises because, as you can imagine, they've been running the business for 15 years, 20 years, in some cases, 100 years, right? A lot of existing applications, and they have to move them to the cloud. The other thing we see are, companies starting with a clean slate, right? Applications born with microservices, designed for containers and Kubernetes. And of course, they also a lot of them standardize on AWS, and EKS becomes the preferred distribution for them on AWS. Those are the patterns you see.
Yeah, this is really insightful, right? If I can recap, it's about building the new applications, then re-architecting the new applications. People are literally going on to this new way of using containers and Kubernetes, and by default, the platform is EKS. So tell us a little bit about Rafe.
Yeah. So, so we are about a 5-year-old company. We're based in Sunnyvale in California. But and again, just like a lot of us, we're a global company these days. Our team's kind of all over. Um, and we've been working particularly closely with AWS for the last 4 years or so. And primarily because, I mean, our customers kind of pulled us in, right? When they kind of gave us the clarity that that they are predominantly going to be on AWS. Of course, we support other clouds too, but the lion's share of our customers, they pulled us into AWS. And we've been working specifically with AWS and the EKS team for a while now. And along that journey, and as you kind of pointed out, we work in the trenches with our customers. I mean, we have a platform, a Kubernetes operations platform that effectively allows customers to deploy, operate both their clusters as well as their applications at scale, spanning multiple business units and all of that. And we've been doing that for 5 years and learning from our customers and finessing and effectively removing roadblocks for them, right? Through innovative turnkey integrations in our platform. So that's in a nutshell, at a high level, mile high view of what we do.
Awesome. Yeah. So as you were building this platform, right, to help your customers who are not the Kubernetes experts, right, what was the business problem or challenges you started to see, right, with respect to as you were building this SaaS platform for them?
Yeah. So, to solve the Kubernetes problem, we have a product that, interestingly, also is SaaS and also deployed on EKS, right? So, in many ways, the problems our customers were facing were also problems we were facing, right? So our operations team, our architecture team, and we had the exact same struggles, right? So, so that kind of gave us, let's call that the first insight, right? Because if we face the pain, I'll give an example. So there's no chance for a company to have infinite budget for operations, right? There's no chance that I can just randomly keep hiring more and more people, right? Sometimes I can't even find the expertise in the market, right? So what we learned was there was a big hill to climb, right? Kubernetes, in a very simplistic manner, it looks easy, but it's a Pandora's box. When you open the box, and then there's many more things to learn, and there are nuances by the cloud, right? And you open a Pandora's box after Pandora's box. Not that is bad. I mean, you don't have to open all those boxes and get into those complexities. But as you mature, we've been running this for 5 years, right? In 5 years, you get to learn about a lot of these nuances, fine tune, and become experts in those things. And as we did all that, we said, hey, this is going to be really hard for a typical organization, right? And not everyone has a big budget or all the experts in-house. So for example, if I'm running a financial application, a SaaS application, that's my core business. If I'm running an insurance application on Kubernetes, I may not be able to justify building a Kubernetes platform inside the company, right? So how do I make life easy for these users? How do I remove the need for having hundreds of Kubernetes experts in-house? Because the reality is every team, you're going to have pockets of people who really know stuff, others who don't. So you need something that will make it easy for everyone and bring everyone at the same expert level. And that was the problem we saw in the market. Every technology that exists there expects people to be an expert. That we realized had to be dumbed down to a point so people can start using it without having to, be taller than 6 feet, as an example.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense, Mohan. So I think so. If I pick up on what you mentioned right now with respect to your customers or the people you are talking in the regulated industry, right? Like finance or I will say healthcare or any one of them, right? Like there is a big aspect with respect to the compliance and the security, right? Like of using or building a multi-tenant platform, right? So as you were building and you were looking from that perspective, because you will be hosting some of these type of customers onto your platform, what were the challenges you saw with respect to a multi-tenant environment, from the security or just availability of the platform for people to just automatic scale and go down?
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, there's a large spectrum of challenges, but maybe for today, it might be good to focus on a couple. You know, when you have an application, so maybe not obvious to folks at first glance with Kubernetes is it is a multi-tenant orchestrator, which means I can have, for example, application 1, application 2, you know, effectively resident on the same cluster. And that can result in some challenges, right? Because you may have a concept of a Kubernetes namespace, but the pods can talk to each other, right? It's like a Wild West in a manner of speaking, right? You do have some basic isolation possible via Kubernetes, but that doesn't cut it for certain or most production use cases. And then people don't have infinite budget to give every application its own cluster, because that wouldn't make any sense. So shared clusters are the norm in the market. And then just namespaces doesn't cut it. Then they start looking at networking. And networking in a cluster is almost, it's like the brain of the system, right? You know, if you mess it up, I mean, you can be in a pretty significant amount of pain, right? With networking. So, I mean, essentially, you saw two problems. One is, larger the enterprise, the more complicated the enterprise, because they have a lot of hybrid deployments, and they have connectivity needs back to their corporate network, etc. The problem they run into is there's not enough IP addresses for them. IP addressing is a big problem, rather more specifically, IP exhaustion issues, right? And that requires people to kind of do something innovative. And this is where I think we did a bunch of work with Calico. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Along with that, there's also a need to make sure that resources in namespace A cannot talk in resources in namespace B. Somehow, maybe implement a network policy to make sure that only resources that are meant to talk to each other can talk to each other. And also, you don't want your resources on Kubernetes randomly connecting out or being able to connect in. So you want some way to control and manage these network policies on Kubernetes. This is a big deal problem. And this is also an area where organizations have challenges for which there are innovative solutions possible.
Okay. So walk me through like one of your scenarios in which customer A or customer B of yours who's using this multi-tenant platform, and they are looking for this type of isolation, right? Like just like, how does this problem start to surface, right? For people, like, is it through discovery with respect to in the planning side itself, or during its when the implementation is starting to happen, there's a compliance requirement? Like, what makes it very obvious for people to do it, like, and they have to do it, like it becomes mandatory?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically, I mean, the journey we've seen with customers, again, there's two approaches people take. They learn as they go, as in, you get started with the vanilla capabilities, because it's impossible. Like even us as consumers, right? When we buy a new phone or something like that, we don't land up doing a PhD on every feature right away, right? We kind of learn as we go. And then in many cases, I'm going to stick with the phone analogy because it's easy for people. So you start with your iPhone or Android phone, and it does a bunch of things. And at some point, you hit a wall, and you say, "Okay, this is the native application or feature is not cutting it." And then what do? You go to an app store. You look for third-party apps. You do some research. You download a third-party app, and it may solve your problem that you're trying to address. So we see a lot of organizations falling into that kind of camp where they start simple, and as their understanding of the needs and issues mature over, let's say, 3 months, 6 months, a year, they keep finding the needs for alternate augmentation with technologies that address the limitations that they have hit. That's by far maybe about 50% of the organizations we see, right? Like organically stumbling onto issues and resolving them through this blocking and tackling process. The other kind of customers we see are they do a lot of planning because they are large enough, big enough, where they have a team that asks all these questions up front. They go through a bunch of discovery processes, and then they come back and say, "Hey, application team, you need these kind of capabilities. Can you write them up front?" And then there's usually an architect or a network engineering person who has experiences before. And we see this pattern with larger enterprises because they have a luxury of an internal platform engineering team, right? So a lot of people, I mean, if you do a Google search and you look at this term called platform engineering, you'll see that it's a rocket ship, right? Like everyone seems to be talking about this. So a lot of organizations are creating these centralized platform engineering teams who are effectively accumulating this knowledge from across various teams, and which means that you don't have to stumble through these issues one after another. You kind of can plan better early on and not make the same mistakes your peer group has made, perhaps, right? So that's the whole charter. So these are the two patterns we see. One, kind of figure things out as they go. The other one is work with a platform engineering team who will give you something that is well designed, like best practices and all of that, based on learnings from other teams. So you basically get a jump start. So those are the two patterns we see in the market.
Awesome. Yeah, I think so. You answered my next question, right? Like as you go and solve this problem or you build your platform, like who were the people you worked with, right? Like, so from what I heard, it's generally the cloud engineering, cloud architect, or the platform engineering folks, right? But is that the only team, or do you see the DevOps or SREs also come into play here?
Yeah. It's a great question. So, in a reasonable sized company, right? You of course have a division of labor, right? What we see the following patterns, right? Of course, the developer builds their app. They usually are multiple steps removed from Kubernetes, right? Like they don't have the time or the bandwidth to get that deep, right? Unless you're a smaller company and have a love for Kubernetes, you're too busy with your sprint cycles, right? Then you have DevOps, who's predominantly focused on the automation and tooling to get those updated container images onto the cluster, right? So their lines and responsibility typically stops there, right? Like somehow get the thing in, and they may be also responsible for like, how do I do a rollback? How do I do upgrades? And usually we see them kind of hand off there, right? Then you have the SRE team. I mean, they are the ones who seem to be more focused on if there's an issue. I mean, how do I build the cluster? How do I design the cluster? How do I operate the cluster? If there's an issue at 2 a.m. in the morning, I mean, they are the ones jumping in and being paged, right? Like the key word here is being paged. Who's going to be woken up? And then finally, the cloud architects. I mean, these are the ones we see that were the initial key participants in, let's call them the platform engineering team, right? Because what they noticed were like the need for these patterns, right? In tested, blessed patterns where you're kind of shrinking business risk, right? Reduce business risk by avoiding unforeseen issues. Like, the last thing you want to do is, I'll just take a real life example. Customer starts with a small cluster with the defaults available in EKS. With certain instance types. and it's application is going really well, it's very successful, and then they hit a wall. They hit a wall with IP exhaustion issues, right? And then now they can't scale to support the business. Well, that would suck, right?
Yep.
Now, if I have to go and re-engineer my CNI, well, that's like open heart surgery. How do I do that on a live cluster, right? Now, the business would come back and ask, how come you guys didn't know about this before, right? What do you mean I got to take downtime, right? What do I tell my customers? What do you mean I had to take a business impact? I mean, that's a bad situation, right? So what we find is, organizations saying, look, I don't want to make those mistakes. I want to design this well from the get-go if possible. At least let me make sure that this architecture or design that I have for my cluster is relevant for my needs for the next 8 months, a year, something like that. And this is what we see customers increasingly do, because otherwise it's very painful, right? You don't know what you're going to hit in 3 months and 6 months, and you don't want disruptions. And there's so many options. It's very confusing. And I think that's the problem people run into. So these teams kind of work together. And predominantly when we work with organizations, we tell them, look, make sure your cluster design, especially the networking aspects and security aspects, are baked in right early on. Do not stumble into these issues when you fail an audit, right? Or some security team comes and says, how come you don't have this resolved?
Awesome.
Yeah.
So that leads to the very next question, right? Like what are your suggestions, like how to build a multi-tenant secure application? Like you can build an application, but how to build a secure application on Amazon EKS, or how did you build your KOps platform? And has a security as a pillar of it on EKS?
Absolutely. So there are, if broadly speaking, and I'm going to grossly oversimplify this for the purposes of a conversational webinar, right? Maybe if you simplify this, there are 3 things, maybe 4 things you got to look at, right? First is, your own application cannot be laden with vulnerabilities and all of that, right? Like the infrastructure itself has to be somewhat secure. So what people generally do is make sure that you have some form of vulnerability scanning for your own application. You have some kind of an SBOM, so you at least know the stuff you're running on your cluster. The resources are all at least vetted, blessed, not laden with vulnerabilities, right? Usually the DevOps team will embed that in their pipelines as most organizations attempt to shift left, right? And now vulnerabilities also can come day 2. So it's a good practice to have some kind of a scanner in the cluster to make sure that, hey, my images that are running on it have not suddenly, new vulnerabilities are discovered, and now you got to take action, right? Like fix them, something like that. That's area 1. Area 2 is you're most likely going to be given a shared resource like a namespace or something like that, right? And if you run an application, you got to have an understanding of, is your application, what is it talking to, right? Is it talking to other resources, maybe in another namespace? Is it talking to a service outside? Most organizations, what we find is they don't even know, right? They don't even know what has changed because everything is so dynamic, right? Today, it talks to this service. Tomorrow, the service contract changes and the application evolves. So the problem we see is people have no idea how applications are changing week by week, sometimes day by day, depending on the velocity of the application teams. So visibility, right? What is talking to what, right? And then notice a change and then ask the question, is that a material change or not, right? And then possibly then harden that by saying these are accepted traffic patterns and we want to whitelist them, and then maybe block everything else, right? So that is something that people do. Because how do you set up a network policy when you don't even know what the application is going to do, right? Because some organizations do that too, where they say, by default, nothing can talk outside the namespace. But that's a very disruptive way of doing things, because think about the cognitive interactions that have to exist between various teams to do exception after exception of exception. Right? So this is very painful from a procedural perspective. So a lot of organizations, we see about 90% of teams that we work with, they typically have somewhat of a liberal policy. But they feed off visibility, right? They have insight into what is talking to what, and then they go ask the teams, hey, why has it changed? Is this expected? If it's not, the last thing they want to do is, well, now communications are happening with these things, and they may span various security domains, right? Like cluster to cluster or cluster to service, or even within the cluster. What organizations and security teams require is they say service to service communication, it better be secured using something like MTLS. We see a lot of organizations look at doing that. Some of them use Istio. By the way, we did that too. Our platform is SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, has been for the last 2 years. One of the key requirements for us was service to service security using MTLS, so mutually authenticated and encrypted. And we landed up using Istio for that, on top of customizing the CNI, etc. Because just customizing the CNI with network policies wasn't sufficient. We had to be taller to meet our regulations and compliance requirements. And we had to also use Istio to make sure we achieve that, because I cannot go retrofit my application. I had to go and implement a service mesh to be able to check that box. A lot of things.
Yeah.
Wouldn't recommend digesting all this day one. There's a recommended phased strategy. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you, Mohan. So just to recap, and as I look at the list which Mohan provided, I am very much tempted to talk like how Calico can help on it. So I'll take a minute here to do a commercial for Calico, right? As simple as that. So the first thing you talked about, the scanning in the CI/CD pipeline, building the scanner into it, and then getting a runtime view of the vulnerabilities. So Calico does that across the board. The visibility into the workload communication, definitely we have, I will say, graph-based visualization. As soon as you plug in your cluster, you will be able to see all the communication which is happening, very much Kubernetes native. And not only that, the thing about the Calico then is like it will provide you the overlay of the policies, right? So you get the communication, but you also see which policies are active, which are not active on that live, and then make the changes to it. Definitely building the network policies, as you guys know, with Calico, it is super easy. We provide you with different type of policy management lifecycle. You can author it, then you can stage it, preview it, and then enforce it. And the last one, which Mohan brought up with respect to cluster communication, we have the cluster mesh there also. But that's pretty much the commercial I wanted to give on Calico. And it's just that you listed everything. And I was like, okay, I'm taking the notes, and I took the notes, and I was like, okay, I can check off all that with the Calico. So that's there. But so tell me, like, as you talked about these things, right? The visibility, the network policy, how did Calico play a role into that one? Like, what brought you to Calico?
Yeah. So I think the key issues were we were trying to minimize the number of moving parts of the edge, right? So I mean, the Kubernetes landscape can become complex very, very quickly if you don't manage it well, right? I mean, you look at the CNC of landscape. I mean, it can make the head spin, right? There's so many things, which is great because the innovation happens in the community, and you can pick and choose best of breed technologies if you have the wherewithal to deal with the ongoing operational complexity, right? Because it's not just, a lot of people think, hey, I'm going to get it up and running and then I'm done. Well, it doesn't stop there, right? I mean, this is like a baby being born, right? You got to pay for school, pay for the doctor, pay for college. I mean, it's a long, big commitment. So the general philosophy we use is we try and keep the architecture simple. And we're looking for, is there one thing that can solve two problems? And is that one thing good enough for us, right? If we don't want to ideally pick only best of breed and assemble it together, then I have like too much complexity. So we're trying to, on one front, reduce complexity, ideally have like one component that can solve both our networking requirements as well as our security requirements, especially network policy requirements, right? That was our need at that time. So that's where Calico, we ended up picking Calico because, of course, we were struggling with IP exhaustion issues on our EKS clusters. As our deployments became more complicated, it was evident that we had to solve the problem either through, the only options we had at that time, of course, AWS has since then made a bunch of enhancements on their side. So the AWS CNI can also be tweaked and customized for certain scenarios to address IP exhaustion, but that doesn't make sense for everybody. And I've seen a bunch of questions here about IPv4 versus IPv6, messing around with prefixes and all of that, but that doesn't make sense for everybody. It may fit the needs for some people. But once you solve the IPAM problem, the next problem is security, network policy. So we only had two options. Option one was use Calico, solve both problems in one shot. Option two was finesse and fine-tune the AWS CNI, and on top of it, overlay that with a secondary CNI, like Calico for network policy. And we thought, hey, why do we want to deal with two components? It's complexity we don't need. So we went with this is the magic of Kubernetes. Everything is pluggable, right? So you can just remove something and plug in with, in our case, it was Calico, just to kind of solve the problem in an elegant manner. And maybe the bigger thing maybe worth emphasizing is we had a deadline, right? We didn't have time to experiment too much, right? We had a deadline with our, we had our SOC 2 type 2 deadline. We had a gun on our head, and we had to check a bunch of boxes. So we had to get it done, and time to market is really important from a business perspective. So sometimes you'll end up going down the well-tested, well-trodden route, just because you don't have the time to experiment too much. Like, you got to get it out. It has to be stable. It has to be secure. And that was the reason why we chose Calico to move forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thanks, Mohan. And I will say the compliance is one of those requirements which I have seen generally from the organizations which are like 20 to 1,000 employees, and they're disrupting with their traditional VM applications, moving into the new ones, or just grounds up. They are basically innovators in the fintech industry. The Calico becomes one of those main areas where they are able to map between the, I think so, CC6, CC7, CC8. Those are the requirements on the SOC 2 side. Then there are PCI requirements, also PCI DSS requirements. So to the audience here, I will say, in addition to what Mohan said for Rafe, like there is another customer of ours whose case study is publicly available, Mulligan Funding. They were also into the same situation of doing the SOC 2 compliance and making sure basically their SaaS platform passes all the compliance checks and has all the access controls which are needed for that initiative. And they are also in the fintech service. They do the microloans there. And for all these companies, there are, I will say, plenty more which we work with across globe itself now, because we help on GDPR, SOC 2, PCI, HIPAA, and all that. We have compliance workshops, self-paced workshops. So you can just go onto our tutorials, sign up for our self-paced workshop, go through it, learn about like how you can become compliant. And it's not about telling you about our product, but it's more about like, okay, if you're building an application, these are the things on the technology and infrastructure side you need to become compliant about. So basically go in there, go through that. So I will say, Mohan, what you said about the SOC 2, I have seen a lot of people in the regulated industry, as they are building all these new applications, they need to be compliant, and they need to be the ones out there. So you went through the implementation, you had basically gone through all the checkboxes. So what were the benefits you got out of Calico? Like, what was the end result?
Yeah. So our Effectively, as I mentioned, one of the key decision points for us was we did not want to have too many moving parts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we were trying to simplify our stack to the extent possible. So we were able to achieve that. That was one of the key goals, right? Because it's really important from an ongoing operations perspective, right? Like if you have 20 moving parts and if there's an issue, how do you zero in on the issue, right? Like we didn't want to deal with that complexity because we also have an SLA with our customers, right? So if something goes wrong, we need to be able to resolve it ideally before they even notice it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so so that was really helpful for us to make sure that our not only our security needs were satisfied, but also that we we were able to operate this in a very simple manner, 24/7 coverage,
Mm-hmm.
be able to meet our SLA, and at the same time. We also wanted to make sure that we have a path forward, right? You don't want to pick technologies where um, it solves problem A and B, but there's no pathway to a C and D, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, so that was also the other thing that we felt like there's a roadmap that exists here for expanding what we are doing. We could incrementally get better over time and improve our own posture. Um, so I would say that was the outcome. Uh, we've been able to maintain our SOC 2 Type 2 for 2 years with ease. Um, Maybe I should just talk about this very quickly. I mean,
Yeah.
all these certifications and compliance things, uh, they are really good. Because without that, it's a big enabler for our business, right? Like customers sign up with us because of our certification levels and compliance levels, right? It's a very big enabler. So time is our enemy and also our friend, right? Enemy in the sense, if I squander time, I have an impact to business. But if my competitors are squandering time, that's beneficial for me because I have my certification and compliance things, right? Um, so speed and velocity is really critical here, right? And leveraging Calico, we were able to get there. I think that is the thing. The other thing is, remember I talked about the Raphis platform itself is used by our customers for Kubernetes operations, right?
Nice.
So the learning we developed using Calico, we were able to bottle up that genie and make it extremely turnkey for our customers. Like I'll give an example just to kind of elaborate that. Maybe two examples. One is we had customers who came and asked us, "Hey, you guys, use Calico. You guys spend some time to do this. Um, I don't want to go deal with this at the same level of complexity as your team. Can you make this a, one-click experience?" So we have done that. Now you can provision and operate EKS clusters using a platform with Calico enabled in one click. Like you don't have to go and delete the AWS CNI and then install Calico. I mean, if you have no networking in place, think about how are things going to talk, right? It's going to be like a messy operating table, right? We made the ability to use Calico for our mutual customers really, really easy, one-click experience. The next thing that people ask is, okay, great. Now my EKS cluster's got Calico on it.
Mm-hmm.
I've solved my IP exhaustion problem using Rafe and Calico on EKS.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what about my network policy?
Yeah.
For that too, we have built an integration where people can, literally enable that in a really easy manner and watch traffic and stuff like that. So, and our whole goal has been not only solve the problem for us, but learn from that and help the larger customer base to leverage Calico where possible. And that's kind of the investments we made.
Got it. Thank you, Mohan.
Yeah.
I see like a lot of participants asking questions, but most of them have been answered by them itself.
Well, that's really cool. Let's work.
Yeah, yeah. The I think so. The main thing was the question which was asked was like default network capabilities of Kubernetes cluster will not work, or that is not enough. I think so. You have answered, but do you want to reiterate something here?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the key thing to consider here is See, remember, the cloud providers have their own constraints that they are working through, right? Any software, any service, and again, AWS is a fantastic service with EKS, right? I believe there's an enormous number of people that are using it, right? And they're very happy. But their own designs are constrained by they're about 15-year-old company, right? Their own architectural limitations that were set 15 years ago, right? They're stuck with some of that, and they're slowly unblocking things that existed. Like I mentioned, you have many more options to fine tune and customize the AWS CNI now. Where some of these issues will not, the issues that existed 2 years ago, there are many more options for you, right? So keep an eye on what they're doing as well, because they're constantly innovating in that space. But for things like network policy, they typically offload that as a customer decision. It's they have a shared responsibility model, right? For at least for security, where they say we'll do these things, and you're responsible for certain things. And typically, they don't want to be messing around with stuff that are your responsibilities, right? It's a difficult decision, and the line gets very murky if they get into a space that effectively is a customer's choice. So yeah, a lot of options. Vanilla Kubernetes and with EKS, you get a bunch of things, and that landscape is also shifting. And so just keep an eye out on both. Just kind of being technically honest here.
Got it. That's pretty much I have. Let me go again and see if someone is asking anything.
Yeah, there were some questions about IPv4, IPv6.
V6,
That maybe
yes.
worth talking, Dheeraj, a little bit.
Sure.
Yes, IPv6 also is an approach that many customers evaluate as, maybe that'll solve the problems to an extent. But then they run into challenges, right? First of all, IPv6 is not for the faint-hearted. It's the way your brain processes some of these, you have to change. And most of us have been born and trained on IPv4 that it looks like I'm reading Martian when I look at IPv6, right? So maybe some people can make the leap, many cannot, right? I'm talking organizationally, right? Like it's not easy for people. And this has impact on other things. You may have other tools. Like, for example, I had a customer who said their audit tool, whatever they were using, was not capable of ingesting and processing IPv6 audit logs, right? So they were stuck between a rock and a hard place. Even though they thought they could make the shift, the ancillary technologies that exist were not able to handle it. So they had no choice but to revert back to IPv4, right? So sometimes you have curveballs like that you don't think about, don't plan for, and then it comes and hits you. The other issue we've seen with IPv4, IPv6 is, sometimes these clusters are connected back to a corporate network, and sometimes you need these things to talk to each other. And then you have other complexity that creeps in, where your corporate network may not be IPv4, may not be IPv6 aware. And then now, how do you deal with that? That's another issue that we've seen some customers struggle with. So, in a nutshell, a lot of options, and our recommendation is, look at, understand your larger landscape and ask questions like, this is not going to live in isolation. It's going to be connected and integrated with a bunch of things. What is the impact on other things with the choice you're making, the technology choice you're making? And ideally, you'd want to pick one that doesn't cause impact to other things. Because change is the hardest thing to implement in an ecosystem.
Exactly. And it's a big change when you go for IP4 to IPv6. That's how I've always seen. And that's why
I get a headache for sure when I look at IPv6.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. I think so. This is what you answered. Do you think moving to IPv6 will ease container journey?
If you're organizationally able to get there, absolutely, right? But typically it's beyond just one team, and we just talked about it at length.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's an idea that should be discussed in a team setting.
Got it. Okay. I think so. That's there is another one which came in terms of service mesh support for AWS EKS. Is there any recommendation that you have, or you think Istio is good enough with any custom operators?
Uh, Istio, I mean, of course, is quite a few options in the market. The big dogs are, of course, Istio and Linkerd. I mean, you have others as well in the market. Um, I mean, we guys use Istio not because we like it, not because we enjoy it, right? If there's an alternate way to solve the problem in a simple way, I'd probably drop it, right? Istio gives us a bunch of headaches, and to be very, very, very honest, we use Istio only for one thing. Only for one thing. We want MPLS for service-to-service security. Without that, we will not have our SOC 2. Right? Another compliance requirement. That's the only thing we need, right? So we're not really using Istio for sophisticated use cases, etc. So I would say if you find a solution that if your needs are very basic, go with the simplest possible solution. Istio can come with a lot of headaches. You may not be prepared for it.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to it. From what I have seen, mostly from the Calico customers, many have gone onto the Istio journey and they have landed in this not so pleasant situations, right? Like, okay, it has promised a lot of stuff. There is also abandonment. There is this tax on the systems. So with Calico, what we do is we provide three basic things which have basically made us come into these conversations, and we have been pulled in by our customers or prospects in, like, as we basically talk about Calico. So when you are looking at the encryption piece, we provide you with the WireGuard encryption, right? So that is one thing which is taken care of. The second thing is you want to see at application level the visibility into which service is talking to which and all that. So with our dynamic service and threat graph, we provide you that visibility. We provide you visibility into the policies even which are implemented at that level. So when you're looking from layer 3 to layer 7 across the board, you get the entire picture all connected at your fingertips in the real time and without any overhead. In regards to the implementation, we have gone with the daemon set implementation rather than sidecar, which has basically made the performance better. So as you know, Calico was one of the first participants for Istio, but then we inherently started to see these architectural gaps and then complexity which was being brought in the project. But 70 to 80% of the enterprises or organizations who need service mesh, they are looking for the observability at application layer, they're looking for encryption, and then they look for some basic policies to be built. And Calico has basically been helpful for, I will say, all the organizations who have talked to. So I will recommend to go and look at the Calico, our commercial options, enterprise, and the Calico Cloud, and see how we can get you started faster. But if you're trying to do some traffic shaping or some complex last two use cases, which Service Mesh generally brings up, those are the ones which we don't. And those one we have seen are more of the early innovator side of the world, like people who like to dabble in that side of the world. But most of the organization are looking for encryption, visibility, and the policy implementation. Calico basically will take care of that. So I will strongly recommend, and I'll put a white paper here, which you can see, and we call it Cluster Mesh. There is another question which has come in. To solve IP exhaustion, will it possible to use non-routable AWS default VPC and pair them with routable network? Mohan.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff baked in there. I think, I think that one, it might be best to take that offline, and because I think I would love to say yes, it will, but I think there's going to be some nuances there. I'd hate to kind of set the wrong expectation. What we generally do is there's always some AWS solutions architect who you'll have access to. I mean, assuming you work for an organization that uses AWS, you'll have access to them. It'd be best if you ask them, because beyond a certain level of complexity, there's a lot of, if you do this, something else gives, and it becomes a nuanced thing. So I don't want to like give a shotgun response, and it looks promising, is worth looking at, which is why I'm kind of suggesting maybe worth having a chat with a solutions architect from AWS, just to be sure that there's nothing else that needs to be factored in. It does look it's possible.
Yeah. And I will say, talk in the Calico channel, also the open source Slack channel. You should be able to get an answer there. I only know is like if you use the Calico IPAM, right, you have to have Calico CNI to basically resolve this issue. I don't know about the very specific here, but this answer, I'm pretty sure on Calico open source channel, Reza or Sean or Casey, or I think so, a couple of other folks should be able to answer right away for you. So this is, this should be answerable, not an issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, one last thing, Dheeraj. I mean, I'm looking at one more question here.
Sure.
I think it's an interesting question. So there are a lot of questions about IPv6 along the way, and maybe it's worth talking about this. So if you think about it, if you think about the clouds, they were initially designed for VMs, right? You don't have millions of VMs in a VPC, right? Even you have much lower numbers. But containers kind of blew that up completely, right? I mean, you can have thousands and millions of containers, and the way the pod networking works here is you kind of are assigned an IP address, and now you're stuck, right? So in some ways, as these clouds had to bolt on these new services where scale was just, many magnitudes larger than what they had initially contemplated with VMs, right? It caused this complexity, right? And disruption in because of the architectural requirements that were set up, 15 years ago, right? Which is kind of why we are where we are, right? So IPv6, long term, I think it'll be a really sweet way to kind of address some of these issues at scale. But personally, I'm a little jaded by IPv6 because for the last 10 years, people have told me this is a year of IPv6 and it hasn't happened. So I don't know. There's always some issue or other that prevents this adoption. Sometimes it's just people. But like I said, I get a headache when I look at IPv6. It might be not just technology. It might be the ecosystem. It might be people. It just takes time to, if you're organizationally able to make the leap, might be worth it.
Yeah. And I know like this is IPAM issues we are talking. I will strongly encourage everyone who's listening to the webinar and are worried about IPAM, go through the Calico CNI and IPAM. The way it has been architected is to solve those IPAM issues across the board, right? So for IPv4 and then definitely IPv6.
Yeah.
And it's open source. So it's basically the CNI and the IPAM, and you can get started with it. I cannot name some references here, but there are very large mega data centers which basically are using the CNI and the IPAM combination just to basically not have this issue. I'm not saying solve this issue, but just not to have this issue across the board. So highly recommend it for you. And that was one of the reasons Rafi uses, like as they go through their explosive growth and they get a lot of these customers, right? All this should basically not be a problem for them, right? And Calico basically solved that problem, addressed that problem fundamentally. So, and how it is architected, how it is built, all that is available in the open source documentation. So it's nothing like will be hidden from you. So you'll be able to see like how it has been architected by the Calico innovators out there. Any other question? Otherwise, we are on top of the hour, and I will say The best thing about this webinar was, one, Mohan shared his journey, and the second is like all you guys participating, asking these questions, and be able to bring and make Mohan talk to you guys, right? So I hope you enjoyed the case study, which we went through how to build a SaaS multi-tenant platform securely with Amazon EKS. The case study is also available. We will share it with you as a PDF with the attendees. AWS is in process of publishing it publicly on their website, so that will also become available in a day or so. Thank you so much. Thanks for attending, and for any questions, let us know. Cody, back to you.
All right, Diraj, Mohan, thank you both so much for joining me. And like Diraj said, thank you everyone for your participation in the Q&A and in the chat. It really does help our program, and it helps give you what you come here for. So we really appreciate your engagement with our speakers today. So
thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the participants for being so engaged.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Thank you both so much. I'd like to remind our audience that our session today was recorded. You will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand, or of course, you can find it living on the Security Boulevard website at securityboulevard.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section. The 4 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card drawing are Swaroop S, Susan J, Ed R, and Powell T. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. It should make its way there in about the next 48 hours. But if you don't happen to see it, please do check your spam folder just in case it gets filtered out. I'd like to thank AWS and Tigera for sponsoring our program today. And to everyone who has joined us, thank you so much for being here. We really value your time, and we also really value your feedback. So feel free to provide that to us in a survey that will pop up on your screen as soon as we close out. If you'd like AWS and Tigera to reach out to you after the fact for maybe a demo or some more information, also indicate so on the final question. Otherwise, we do hope to see everyone at a future Techstrong learning experience. Have a great rest of your day, and Mohan, Diraj, thank you once more.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.